Now, a geopolitical dispute between the Netherlands and China over the control of the chip maker Nexperia is threatening to disrupt global car production.
In late September, a quiet decision in The Hague set off shockwaves across the global economy. The Dutch government announced it was taking control of a Chinese-owned chipmaker called Nexperia, a company that produces millions of small but vital semiconductors used in cars, phones, and power systems. Officials framed it as a move to protect national security, yet few expected how far the impact would reach. For the first time since 1952, the Netherlands activated an old Cold War-era law known as the Goods Availability Act, giving the state the power to seize private industry in times of crisis. Within hours, the message from Beijing was clear. China saw the takeover as an act of economic aggression. Behind the diplomatic language, it was a direct hit to one of China's largest technology investors in Europe. The move didn't just strain relations, it exposed how fragile global supply chains have become. From Europe's car factories to Asia's electronics hubs, the shock began to spread. And as both sides dug in, what started as a legal maneuver over one chip company quickly turned into something much bigger. A confrontation that now threatens the future of Europe's industrial heart. When the Dutch government moved against Nexperia, few realized how extraordinary the decision really was. The company, based in the city of Nijmegen, is owned by China's Wingtech Technology, one of the country's major semiconductor investors. On September 30th, the Netherlands invoked the Goods Availability Act, a Cold War-era law written back in 1952 that allows the state to seize control of private firms if national security is deemed at risk. It was the first time in history that this law had ever been used. Officials said the move was necessary to safeguard Europe's semiconductor supply. But the timing raised questions. Washington had been pressing its allies for months to tighten control over Chinese technology firms. Dutch authorities also cited alleged governance failures inside Nexperia, including a supposed $200 million misappropriation of assets by senior executives. Beijing dismissed those claims as a political excuse and accused Europe of expropriating Chinese property under pressure from the United States. For investors and analysts, it was a shocking escalation. Nexperia wasn't a small startup. It was a major chip producer supplying everything from car electronics to power devices used in industrial systems. Overnight, a single government decision placed thousands of European jobs and billions in trade at risk. The message spreading through boardrooms was simple. The rules of global business had changed. And before anyone could absorb what had happened, China was already preparing its response. Beijing's reaction came fast. On October 4th, just days after the Dutch takeover, China's Ministry of Commerce issued a sweeping order. All chip exports from Nexperia's Chinese plants were suspended. What began as a legal dispute instantly turned into a full-blown trade retaliation. The ban covered critical components like transistors, MOSFETs, and electronic control units, the small chips that help manage everything from a car's braking system to its battery performance. Within hours, European automakers realized how deep their dependence ran. Nexperia's factories in China handled testing and packaging for semiconductors made in Europe and shipped them back for final assembly. Once those exports stopped, the chain broke. Production plans had to be redrawn, and engineers started warning that even short delays could halt car assembly lines within weeks. The European Automobile Manufacturers Association, ACEA, publicly sounded the alarm, warning that the disruption could cause production halts across the continent. Analysts noted that many automakers had only 3 to 4 weeks of chip inventory left. China's move was not just symbolic, it cut directly into Europe's industrial core. The export ban also sent a message to Washington and Brussels alike. If Western governments were willing to seize Chinese assets, Beijing could just as easily use its manufacturing power to strike back. As containers sat idle in Shanghai ports and European suppliers scrambled for replacements, the confrontation began shifting from boardrooms to factory floors. And that's when the real shock started to spread through Europe's auto industry. By late October, the situation spiraled into open defiance. On October 23rd, Nexperia China, the company's massive operation in Shanghai, declared itself independent from its Dutch headquarters. The announcement stunned analysts and investors. A simple corporate directive had turned into a geopolitical standoff. The spark came when Nexperia's European management ordered the dismissal of John Chang, the company's longtime vice president of global sales and marketing. The Shanghai branch refused to comply, arguing that the order violated Chinese labor laws and was therefore unenforceable. In a public statement, it said, "This directive breaches local labor regulations." The message was unmistakable. China was no longer taking orders from Europe. This was more than an internal dispute. It revealed how global companies are now being split along national lines. Nexperia's Chinese facilities account for 70% of the firm's total chip output, yet only 30% of that production can currently reach world markets because of the export ban imposed earlier. Billions of dollars worth of chips were effectively trapped inside China, while European factories were forced to slow down or suspend production. Major suppliers immediately began searching for alternatives. Valeo SE, one of Europe's largest component manufacturers and a supplier to Volkswagen, BMW, and Stellantis, confirmed that it had already secured replacements for 95% of the affected semiconductors. The statement offered brief relief to investors but underscored the growing uncertainty in Europe's auto sector. The Nexperia dispute now looked less like a corporate disagreement and more like a corporate mutiny. Two headquarters, two legal systems, and two governments quietly backing each side. What began as a political seizure in the Netherlands had evolved into a global power struggle fought through factories, contracts, and the laws that govern them. And for Europe's automakers, the fallout was only beginning. The consequences rippled through the global auto industry almost overnight. Across Europe and Japan, major carmakers began sounding the alarm. Volkswagen, Europe's largest automaker, circulated an internal memo to employees warning that the Nexperia disruption could soon affect its own production lines. In view of the dynamic situation, the company wrote, "We cannot rule out an impact on production in the short term." For a firm that operates more than 10 brands and employs hundreds of thousands of workers, even minor supply interruptions could translate into major losses. At Volvo, Chief Executive Håkan Samuelsson admitted to reporters that he expected some factories will shut down, even if his own group hadn't yet been directly hit. The warning reflected a broader unease among manufacturers who depend on Nexperia chips for electronic control units, battery systems, and safety components. In Germany, the country's powerful auto lobby, the VDA, called the situation serious and confirmed that its members had received a notice from Nexperia on October 10th describing a sequence of events that made it impossible to ensure chip deliveries. Outside Europe, the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association, whose members include Toyota, Nissan, Honda, and Mazda, said it had been told that chip shortages could seriously impact global production. The UK's Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders added that such disruptions were the last thing the struggling sector needed. For carmakers already pressured by tariffs, falling demand, and Chinese competition, this new supply crisis was a blow to confidence. Assembly lines that once symbolized Europe's industrial strength were now vulnerable to decisions made in distant capitals. And behind every halted shipment and delayed model, a deeper problem was beginning to surface inside Europe's economy itself. Europe's car industry has long been a symbol of strength, but the cracks are now impossible to ignore. The Nexperia crisis exposed just how dependent Europe's factories have become on Chinese technology and materials. China currently supplies around 90% of the European Union's rare earth imports, minerals essential for electric motors, batteries, and sensors. When Beijing tightened export rules, shipments plunged. Exports dropped 31% in September alone, according to China's customs data. What began as a chip shortage was now turning into a broader industrial squeeze. The human toll is becoming clearer, too. In 2024, Germany's auto industry employed roughly 773,000 people, yet more than 51,500 jobs disappeared within a single year, almost as many as in the previous 6 years combined. Towns that once thrived on steady factory work are struggling to balance their budgets. In Ingolstadt, home of Audi, city officials reported an €80 million shortfall in tax revenue after car sales and production slowed sharply. Europe's push to rebuild its own supply chains has also stumbled. The collapse of Northvolt in 2024 wiped out what was meant to be Europe's flagship battery project. Porsche has already abandoned its battery production plans, calling them unprofitable. Only a few initiatives, like Volkswagen's PowerCo Gigafactory in Salzgitter and the Verkor plant in Dunkirk, are still moving forward, but they remain years away from mass output. Every indicator now points to the same conclusion. Europe's industrial foundation is eroding faster than expected, while its competitors are accelerating. And as dependence deepens, the struggle to protect what's left of its manufacturing power is entering a far more dangerous phase. The Nexperia confrontation has become more than a corporate or trade dispute. It marks the rise of a new industrial Cold War. What once played out quietly in trade negotiations is now unfolding through laws, regulations, and courtroom orders. Both sides are rewriting the rules to protect their national interests. The Netherlands used a Cold War-era security law to seize control of a Chinese company. Beijing responded by invoking Chinese labor law to reject European authority. The legal tools may differ, but the goal is the same: to defend sovereignty over technology. Observers have drawn parallels with Arm China's split in 2022, when the local chief defied the British parent company and tried to take the subsidiary public on his own. But this time, governments are directly involved. In the Nexperia case, ministries and embassies are quietly guiding every decision, turning what began as a corporate disagreement into a test of power between nations. Analysts call this a form of legal warfare, where competing systems of law are now being used as economic weapons. Companies caught between these systems are finding it harder to operate across borders. Each side is tightening control over patents, licenses, and export permits, effectively redrawing the boundaries of globalization. The Cold War may have ended decades ago, but its methods are returning. Not through military blocs, but through factories, contracts, and the fragile laws that govern global trade. Europe now stands at a crossroads. The same factories that once defined its post-war prosperity are under pressure to reinvent themselves or fade into history. Professor Andreas Hermann from the University of St. Gallen summed it up clearly. The combustion engine was Germany's ultimate advantage, but this industry must go through crisis to emerge stronger. That transformation is already underway, though the outcome remains uncertain. Some companies are fighting back with innovation. In Friedrichshafen, engineering firm ZF has developed an electric motor that uses no rare earth metals, relying instead on advanced electromagnetism. It's a glimpse of how European technology might evolve beyond China's mineral dominance. Meanwhile, Volkswagen's PowerCo is building a massive gigafactory in Salzgitter, aiming to bring battery production back to German soil. In France, Vercors, supported by Renault, is preparing a similar plant in Dunkirk to supply next-generation EVs. These projects offer cautious optimism, but they also highlight the scale of Europe's challenge. Competing with China's vast supply networks will take time, and every delay means more jobs and revenue lost. The continent's industrial future now depends on whether it can adapt fast enough to regain control of its own production before it slips away for good. The question now is unavoidable. Has Europe picked a fight it isn't ready to win? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you follow global economic shifts, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next videos.